Good day to you all. This is your counselor, Dennis Barrow, being brought to you by Advent Broadcast Network in conjunction with Whole Life Ministry. We are here to make sure that you enjoy your life. You get to an understanding of what God has in mind for you in your personal life and your relational life. So may God bless you today, and may He give you peace as you continue to serve Him. And may today's broadcast be a blessing to you, and may your life continue to improve because of your listening today. God bless you. Let us continue today as we begin a new series. The series has to do with reconciliation. So we say restoring broken relationships. And I know out there are so many relationships that are broken. Even though people are still living in the same houses, the same apartments, their relationship is broken. Some have separated. Some are divorced. Some are fighting day in and day out. Broken relationships. Some are giving each other the silent treatment because they don't want to continue with the mess, as they call it. Broken relationships. Remember, whenever we talk about reconciliation, reconciling, it means something was there before, and now that something has been broken. And so in order to reconcile, we need to restore. We need to reunite. We need to put back together or bring back together. All of this signifies and demonstrates and explains the word that we are using, reconciliation, restoring broken relationships. You don't restore something that is already there. So when your relationship suffers because of some situation that took place, and the relationship comes to the point where brokenness enters, it is not necessary for us to get rid of the relationship. It's not necessary for us to dump the relationship. It's not necessary for us to, and I'm going to use the word, always necessary for us to forget the relationship, because there are some relationships, and the majority of relationships, that can be restored. Now I must admit there are some relationships that seem anyhow you try, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. Because there's so much abuse, so much misuse, so much misunderstanding, so much not caring. So that relationship or those relationships may not be able on a normal level to be restored. However, we know that with God, all things are possible. We also know with God, nothing is too difficult. So even those relationships can be restored. But when we look at them from a human standpoint, we may say, I have gone through enough. I've taken enough. I don't want to do this anymore. And so that way we push that relationship aside. And no one can blame you for that. But the idea I'm bringing to you this today, and in this series of restoring broken relationships, or reconciliation as we call it, there's a possibility that most relationships out there that are broken because most people take a molehill and make it into a mountain. And it's not so much that there was such a great issue or great problem, but we, in our minds, as we keep thinking about it, and as we keep telling ourselves, no one is going to treat me like that, no one is going to say that to me, no one is going to do this to me, no one is going to... We keep turning it over and over in our minds, and before you know it, it becomes this great problem that we seem impossible to solve. And that's why God has given us His Word. That's one, which is the most important thing. And secondly, that's why God has given us counselors. Remember, all healing comes from God. All healing. Whether it's physical or emotional, it comes from God. We may not want to always agree, but that's what happens. God is the one who brings about the healing in our minds and in our bodies. Medication tends to subdue and keep it under control so we can function and we can operate. But the healing itself comes from God. So here is the thing. Did something go wrong with your relationship? Our relationship with God ended up the same way. Remember Adam and Eve? They went astray from God and they followed someone else, the enemy. And God reconciled himself to us by sending his son Jesus Christ to die for us. And the Bible tells us, while we were yet sinners, while we were yet in our mess and doing our mess, Christ came and he died for us to reconcile us, to restore us, to reunite us, to bring us back to. In other words, he gave us an avenue to come back to God so that we can serve him the way we ought to, and we can be with him in the end and live with him and be restored to what he originally planned in the beginning. Reconciliation, restoring broken relationships. Now let's look at this a little bit. Whenever we talk about broken relationships, it has to do, as the Bible term uses it, with the heart. But the Bible also tells us that the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So sometimes our hearts deceive us. And instead of seeing our relationships as not being able to be reconciled, we may be being deceived by our hearts. And if that is the case, then reconciliation then is possible. So here is the thing. Whenever there is a heart problem, let's we look out there in the world, in the medical world, they diagnose the heart to determine what it is. Is it a hardening of the arteries? Is it a valve that's bad? Is it fluid around the heart? What is the problem in our physical world? They make a diagnosis and then they make a treatment plan. It's the same for our hearts when it comes to our life, our spiritual life, or emotional life, or relational life. It's the same thing. Reconciliation is a heart problem. Relationships are created and affects the heart. And so anytime there is a problem in our relationships, we need to look at the heart to see what the problem is with the heart. For example, if there is a problem between us and I'm trying to get us to work together and you are pulling away, then the question comes up, is there pride in the heart? Is there pride? Are you so proud that you refuse to give in? Are you so proud that you are refusing to say, you know what, I'm sorry, forgive me? That's a heart problem. And a lot of us, well, with the ladies we call it pride. With us as men, we tend to want to use the word ego. It's our ego that is preventing us from saying, I'm sorry for doing that, please forgive me. And we would fight and fight and fight and refuse to give in until it's done our way. But sometimes we have to take wrong. We have to say, you know what? This is my relationship. And whatever happens in my relationship, I am responsible for restoring it. I want you to get that. Don't miss that. It is my relationship. And whatever takes place in my relationship, good or bad, I'm responsible for it. If it's something that is creating an issue in my relationship, then I need to be big enough to say, hey, nobody out there is going to make my relationship work for me. Nobody out there is going to build my relationship for me. Nobody out there is going to come in and automatically get my relationship functioning the way it ought to. I am responsible for the well-being of my relationship. So why am I fighting the very thing I want to build up? Why am I tearing down the very thing that I want to build up? Why am I pushing aside the very thing I want to enhance? Why am I just destroying? Why am I moving away from? Why am I giving the silent treatment to the very thing I want to enjoy? So I need to stop long enough and ask myself those questions. So whenever anything goes wrong in my relationship, I need to realize, wait a minute. I need to restore this. Because if I don't restore it, no one else is going to do it for me. And so pride, ego, we need to get rid of them. When we diagnose the heart and we realize that emotionally we are prideful and we have this ego attitude, then we need to get rid of it, because it's not helping to restore the relationship that we so desperately want. The second thing as we diagnose the heart is to determine whether or not there is anger. Because when there is anger, what happens is we tend to have the thought in our head about what happened, and we turn it over and over and over. Until we take care of the anger, that thought keeps going over and over and over. And the more we think about that thought, the bigger it becomes. And the bigger it becomes, the less we can see to take care of the problem. And so here comes the problem. And the problem now looks impossible because of our thought attack. We allow our thoughts to attack us. And when they attack us, we have no way of overcoming them now. It's like taking a small snowball and putting it at the top of a snow hill and letting it roll down the hill. By the time it gets down to the bottom of the hill, that small snowball has become a large one. That is what our thought attacks do to us. The little issue that we had, and we refuse to solve it and restore the relationship, we keep thinking about what the person did, or we keep thinking about what happened, or we keep thinking that ain't nobody going to get me to submit to this. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And the more we think about that thought and that issue, the larger it becomes, and the more difficult it is for us to restore it. Remember what I said some time ago? We don't lose our temper. We choose our temper. We choose to get annoyed, upset, mad, angry, or we choose to be joyful, to be happy, to be pleased, to be contented. We make a choice. We don't lose anything. We make a choice. As a matter of fact, listen to me. If you say, I lose my temper, then you should never get annoyed. You should never get upset. You should never get angry. Because if you have lost it, you don't have it. So how could you get angry? You have lost it. No, we don't lose our temper. We choose our temper. And here's the thing with that. The more we allow that thought to go through our minds, the more angry we become. And the more angry we become, the more bitter we become. And the more bitter we become, that bitterness then ends up turning into resentment. And when I resent you, that's a condition of the heart. When I resent you, I really don't want anything to do with you. I don't even like the soil you walk on. I don't like how you look. I can't stand to hear you talk. I can't stand to have you in my presence. Resentment, one of the worst things out. It goes from anger to bitterness to resentment. And now you are the worst person out. And whatever it takes to get rid of you, I will be willing to do that. That is where resentment comes in. And you cannot allow yourself as a child of God to resent anyone. Because when you do it, you have already committed murder, so to speak. Because you have already hated that person. And Christ said it. If you hate a person without cause, you have already committed murder in your heart. Resentment takes us there. And so it's important to understand that when it comes to reconciliation, when it comes to restoring broken relationships. The Bible tells us in Hebrews 12, around verse 14 and 15, it says, looking carefully lest anyone let's start again. Hebrews 12, 14 and 15. It says, pursue peace. Pursue peace. Not anger, not bitterness, not prideful behavior. Pursue peace. Looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God. In other words, you need favor from God. I need favor from God. So why do I want to attack you and put you down? Why do I want to destroy you? When tomorrow I will need you to help me and support me and to lift me up. You see, this is the problem that we face. We believe that we will never have a problem. So when you do this to me, I come down on you with all that I could come down on, forgetting that tomorrow I may commit a problem that I need you to help me on. Tomorrow I will commit a problem that I need your support. Tomorrow I will commit a problem that I need someone to put their arms around me and say, it will be okay. Don't worry, it's going to be okay. See, that's the problem we have. We don't realize that we may miss God's grace because we refuse to meet our grace to somebody else. So it continues, and this is what it says, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God. Then it says this, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble. Any root of bitterness. A root of bitterness comes in when anger is planted. And when anger is planted and watered and fed, it begins to grow. And when it grows, it turns into bitterness. And when bitterness matures, it turns into resentment. And the Bible said, be careful. Pursue peace. So in my relationships, I always need to pursue peace with my spouse, children, and with all those around me. Pursue peace. Whether it's on your job, whether it's at your church, whether it's in the community, our objective should always be to pursue peace, which is saying I'm pursuing reconciliation. I'm restoring whatever was broken. I have looked at my heart and I've recognized that there are some issues that I need to take care of. And I'm going to get rid of bitterness. I'm going to get rid of the anger, the bitterness, so resentment never raises its ugly head. We are talking about reconciliation. And in order for us to understand reconciliation, we must understand where it comes from. What causes it? Brokenness in a relationship and refusal to take care of it or to restore it is what brings about the opportunity for us to reconcile. And even if we have the brokenness, there is still, without even going to the point where we get angry, there is still that opportunity firsthand, without any issue going on, for us to reconcile. Realizing that we don't want it to get to the point where we can't talk one with the other. So it's important to reconcile as soon as possible. It's important to restore the relationship as soon as possible. The longer we take, the more the enemy puts into our heads and keep us from functioning the way we need to function. That's why the Bible tells us that God has given us the ministry of reconciliation. To be reconciled one to the other. To be restored, to be reunited, to be brought back, to be put back together. God has given us that ministry. So we have it. It's in us. The problem is we allow everything else that the enemy throws in our way to prevent us from being reconciled. We allow pride and ego. We allow anger and bitterness and resentment to step in. Here is the thing. You have to know and I have to know. This one other aspect of the heart, hopelessness. Do we believe that God is not able to help us through this difficult situation with this other person? Do we believe that? That brings on hopelessness. Whenever I think that it's impossible for us to make this work, then that brings on hopelessness. And no way will I be able to reconcile to that person. What I've just done is judge the whole situation. And whenever you judge it and judge it negatively, there's no way you will be able to make it work. I can't judge it and say this is a waste of time, it will never happen, it will never work, and then expect it to work. It wouldn't work from my perspective. What do you want with your relationships? Now, granted, I said there are some relationships that isn't worth the work. But it doesn't mean we can't be reconciled to them and treat them as God's people. But we don't have to be with them as a husband and a wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, man, woman. We don't have to be. But we can reconcile and still respect them for who they are. But remembering that God created them in His image and likeness just as He created me. Remembering also that God paid the same price for them that He paid for me. The price He paid for me was His death on Calvary. The price He paid for them was His death on Calvary. So we are worth the same thing. That's why being reconciled is so important, because we are not better than each other. We are here to support and encourage one another. I don't have to be buddy-buddy with you, but I need to respect you, and whatever I can do to help you, by God's grace, I need to be able to do that. So today, as we listen and as we understand this series on reconciliation, restoring broken relationships, I hope you have a chance today, after hearing this broadcast, to go check your heart and make a diagnosis. What's the problem with my heart? What's going on in my heart? Is there pride? Is ego taking control? Is there hopelessness? Is there anger and resentment and bitterness in my heart? If that's the case, then you need a heart transplant, or you need a bypass. And God has promised us to give us a new heart. He has promised to cleanse our heart. He said, if you come to me and confess, I'm faithful and just to forgive and to cleanse you from all unrighteousness. So He's able to take out that bitter root. He's also able to give us a new heart. For anyone who comes to Christ, who accepts Him, is a new creation. All things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. New heart. So give God that chance today. Give Him the opportunity to work with you and in you, so that your life can be one where you can measure properly, where you can gauge properly, and where you can reconcile or restore all of the broken relationships that you have, so that you can have peace and the favor of God in your life. God bless you. May He cause His face to shine upon you. May He give you peace as you continue to serve Him and be reconciled.